Hello guys, I'm Matthew Cruz from BSB MM1. Today I'm gonna talk about Miguel de Cervantes, or the author of the novel Don Quixote. Miguel de Cervantes, in full Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Miguel de Cervantes was born near in Madrid, 1547. The fourth of the seven children, Miguel de Cervantes struggled financially for almost his entire life. His father, Rodrigo, deaf from birth, worked as a surgeon, a lowly trade at the time, and the family moved around often in Cervantes' youth as his father searched for better prospects. Whatever his family's financial conditions, Cervantes was an avid reader as a child, a skill he was reportedly taught by a relative. But whether he had much in the way of formal education has been a subject of debate among scholars. Based on analysis of Cervantes' later work, some believe that he may have been taught by the Jesuits. However, others dispute this claim. So next, let's talk about the creation of Don Quixote. Cervantes' first novel, La Galatea, was published in 1585, but the pastoral romance failed to make an impression. Cervantes attempted to make it in the then profitable world of the theater at the same period. During the age, plays were a popular form of entertainment in Spain, and a successful playwright might make a decent livelihood. Unfortunately, Cervantes' plays did not bring him riches or recognition, and only two have survived. Cervantes began working as a commissary with the Spanish Armada in the late 1580s. The job, which required collecting food supplies from rural areas, was thankless. Cervantes was accused with mismanagement and sentenced to prison after several refused to produce the requisite products. During this difficult period, however, he began to write some of literature's greatest masterpieces. In 1605, Cervantes published the first part of Don Quixote, a novel that tells the story of an elderly man who becomes so enamored by the old stories of brave knights that he seeks out his own adventures. The title character soon gets lost in his own fantasy world, believing he is one of these knights and convincing a poor peasant, Sancho Panza, to serve as his squire. In one scene, the deluded Don Quixote even fights a windmill, mistaking it for a giant. Quixote finally regains his sense before the novel ends. Don Quixote was the first best-selling book in the world, and it was eventually translated into more than 60 languages. In 1615, Cervantes released the second half of the story. So that's all for the author's background. Thank you.
The character's characterization. I am Erron de la Torre, and for today, I'm going to tell you or share a story to you who are the character in Don Quixote's story. Don Quixote, the novel's trigonomic hero. Don Quixote's main quest in life is to revive knight-errantry in a world devoid of chivalric virtues and values. He believes only what he chooses to believe and sees the world very differently from most people. Honest, dignified, proud, and idealistic. He wants to save the world. As intelligent as he is mad, Don Quixote starts out as an observed and isolated figure and ends up as a pitiable and lovable old man whose strength and wisdom had failed him. Sancho Panza, the peasant laborer, greedy but kind, faithful but cowardly whom Don Quixote takes as his squire, a representation of the common man. Sancho is a foil to Don Quixote's and virtually every other character in the novel. His proverb-ridden peasant wisdom and self-sacrificing Christian behavior to prove the novel's most insightful and honorable worldview. He has an awestruck love for Don Quixote, but grows self-confident and saucy, ending the novel by advising his master in matters of deep personal philosophy. Rocinante, Don Quixote's barn horse. Rocinante is slow but faithful, and he is worn out as Don Quixote is. Dapple, Sancho's donkey. Dapple's disappearance and reappearance is the subject of much controversy, both within the story and within the literary criticism concerning Don Quixote. Hamete Beniguel, the fictional writer of Moorish descent from whose manuscript Cervantes supposedly translated the novel. Cervantes uses the figure of Beniguel to comment on the ideas of authorship in literature explored in the novel, and to the critic historians. Beniguel's opinions, found in his so-called historical text, show his contempt for whose write about chivalry falsely and within embellishment. Dulcinea del Toboso, the unseen force striving of all Don Quixote's adventures. Dulcinea, a peasant woman and who Don Quixote's envisioned as his lady love, has no knowledge of his chivalric dedication to her. Though constantly mentioned and centrally important to the novel, she never appears as a physical character. Cervantes, the supposed translator of Beniguel's historical novel, who interjects his opinions into the novel at key times. Cervantes intentionally creates the impression that he did not invent the character of Don Quixote. Like Beniguel, Cervantes is not physically present, but is a character nonetheless. In his prologues, dedication and invention of Beniguel, Cervantes enhances the self-referential nature of the novel and forces us to think about literature's purpose and limitations. The Duke and the Duchess, the cruel and haughty controversy of the adventures that occupy Don Quixote for the majority of the novel's second part. Bored and snobby, the Duke and the Duchess feign interest in Don Quixote and Sancho but continually play pranks on them for their personal entertainment. The Duke and the Duchess spend so much money and effort on their ploys that they seem as mad as Don Quixote. Altisidora, the Duchess' bratty maid. Altisidora pretends to love Don Quixote, mocking his concept of romantic love. Samson Carrasco, a sarcastic student from Don Quixote's village. Samson mocks Don Quixote at first but loses him in a combat, then dedicates himself to revenge. Self-important and snappy, Samson fails to grasp often playful nature of Don Quixote's madness. Priest, a friend of Don Quixote's. The priest disapproves of fictional books that in his opinion negatively influence society. Nonetheless, he enjoys tales of chivalry so much that he cannot throw them away. Moreover, despite his social conscience, he enjoyed Don Quixote's madness at times. The Barber, Don Quixote's friend who recognized Don Quixote's madness but intervenes only to help the priest carry out his plan. The Barber strenuously disapproves of Don Quixote's chivalry. Teresa Pasa, Sancho's good-hearted wife. Teresa speaks in proverbs, exhibiting more wisdom than most other characters. Unambitious but a bit greedy, she endures Sancho's exploits and supports him with her prayers. Dorothea, Ferdinand's faithful and persistent love. Dorothea plots tradition to hunt down Ferdinand when he takes her chastity but refuses to marry her. Deceptive and cunning, smart and aggressive, Dorothea is the typical female character of her time. Countess Trifaldi, a fictitious maidservant in distress who is impersonated by the Duke's steward. The Countess' sub-story sends Don Quixote and Sancho off of their expedition on the wooden horse. She is more ridiculous and fantastic than anyone except Don Quixote.
Good morning everybody, I am Cyrylle Desquitado and today I'll be discussing the settings and the introduction of the novel Don Quixote by Cervantes. The novel is set in Spain, Cervantes' homeland, through which he traveled during his youth and middle years. The novel provides a cross-section of Spanish life, thought, and feeling at the end of the chivalric age. In fact, the whole fabric of 17th century Spanish society is detailed with piercing yet sympathetic insight in 1,000 pages of closet life. Cervantes' story takes place on the plains of La Mancha, specifically the comarca of Camp de Montiel. The story also takes place in El Toboso, where Don Quixote goes to seek Dulcinea's blessings. Introduction. Quijano maintains his tall, thin psyche by eating meat hashes, bacon, and eggs, lentils, and the odd pig yolks on Sundays. For major occasions, such as attending Mass on holy days of obligation, he dressed up in a gorgeous suit with a jerkin, velvet stockings, and velvet pantufles. His great passion in life is to discuss and read about knights of old and their weaponry, their battles, and their ladies. It is not uncommon for him to argue at length with the village priest and barber over who was the best of the knights. He spends full days reading books about them according to Quijano. He continues to read till the sun rises at night, then the cycle starts all over again. His sanity began to deteriorate as a result of his lack of sleep and the burden of stories he carried inside his head. He becomes so lost that he resolves to become a knight-errant himself, donning an ancient suit of armor left behind by his grandfather, as well as a headgear with a missing visor that he covers with a cardboard fluff. More rummaging yields the required weaponry. He names a skinny barnyard Rocinante as his loyal steed and a peasant girl from the neighboring village of Toboso as his lady fair. It makes no difference that he has never spoken to Aldonza Lorenzo, the damsel in distress. Quixote considers her to be his own and gives her the name Dulcinea del Toboso, and in her honor he promises to undertake heroic feats. Finally, he has an innkeeper give him the moniker Don Quixote de la Mancha, which he came up within 8 days.
So now let's talk about the rising action. There are two parts of the rising action. The first part is Don Quixote wanders Spain and encounters many strange adventures before the priest finds him doing penance in the Sierra Morena. The second part, Don Quixote wanders Spain and has many adventures, especially under the watch of a haughty duke and duchess. So in conclusion, steady diet of wackiness, the action in this book isn't so much rising action, as it is a constant barrage of weird antics and crazy violence. But then again, you can't expect a constant build-up of tension from a book that's around 1,000 pages in most editions. Don Quixote and Sancho gets themselves into all kinds of trouble, but the overall feeling is more like watching episodes of a long-running TV series than watching a single 2-hour movie. So that's all about the rising action. Thank you.
Good day everyone. I am Miss Deogracias and I will be discussing the climax of Don Quixote, both in Book 1 and Book 2 of the story. I'll be also discussing the denouement of the story as well as the moral of the story in this book later on. So in the climax of the story, Don Quixote, that is written in Book 1, Sancho Panza arrived at the mountains, telling the priest and the barber that he already found Don Quixote, who was half-starving and slightly crazier than usual. The priest and the barber, whom decided themselves to help Dorothea and Cardenio in settling things about their spouses, asked the two if they could help them to bring Don Quixote on their way home. Dorothea eventually eagerly wants to help them out and introduces herself as the Ethiopian princess named Micomicona. So they go to wherever Don Quixote was, and Dorothea told the hopeless wannabe chivalry knight to help her in killing a big giant who stole her kingdom. And Don Quixote of course agreed and got himself ready together with his horse Rocinante and armoring up himself. The 6 of them arrived into an inn and a lot of things happened in there. Dorothea and Cardenio reunited with Don Fernando and Lucinda. A full-on tavern brawl broke out inside the inn. 4 big and heavily armored men ride up to the inn looking for a young man named Don Luis, who happened to be members of the Holy Brotherhood. who have warrant for Don Quixote's arrest for the release of those galley slaves back in the early chapters of the book. One of them recognizes Don Quixote and goes to arrest him, but the priest convinces them that Don Quixote is clearly out of his sanity and they should let them take him home and receive proper treatment. The men eventually agreed, and the priest, together with his companions, figured out that the best way to bring back Don Quixote home is literally to tie him up and stick him on a cage so he can't run off. That is in the book 1. The climax in the second book of the story Don Quixote started when Don Quixote was forced to stay in Barcelona, where he met the Knight of the White Moon. This knight challenges Don Quixote to a duel over the beauty of his lady, whoever she may be. If Don Quixote wins, he can cut off the knight's head and take his horse and armor, but if the Knight of the White Moon wins, Don Quixote has to retire from the knighthood for a full year. Don Quixote agrees. The battle is brief, and Don Quixote is soundly defeated and carried back to Don Antonio's house. Don Antonio eventually followed the Knight of the White Moon and discovers he is none other than Samson Carrasco.
This is the following action of the Don Quixote, and it has two parts. The first part is when the priest and the barber take Don Quixote home in a cage, and Don Quixote resigns himself to the fact that he is enchanted. The second part is when Don Quixote returned home after his defeat and resolved to give up knight-errantry. And that is the following action of Don Quixote.
His days of adventures in being a chivalrous hero have come to an end. Don Quixote, feeling increasingly weak and tired after the long adventures, finally returns home with Sancho. Don Quixote is ready to give up on the danger and strain of being a knight and speaks of becoming a shepherd instead. But his family believes this sort of life would be just as much of a hardship at his age, and they beg him to stay at home instead. To their surprise, he agrees and takes to his bed. Soon, he is very ill with what some think is a broken heart from the defeats he suffered while adventuring. Don Quixote then states that he regrets the fantasy life he has led, and it was all a waste of time. He asks Sancho to forgive him for leading him on such a pointless escapade, and then he dies. Yet, after his death, several villages compete to be known as Don Quixote's hometown, and seem rather proud to have been associated with perhaps the greatest fantasy adventurer of all time. One of the common concluded lessons from Don Quixote is the phrase, "Don't lose with reality." It is somehow true because of how the story just started telling us why Alonso Quijano wanted to become a chivalry knight and eventually lose his sanity from reading too much books about chivalry. But regardless of the plot and motive of Don Quixote, we should also take a peek on Don Quixote and Sancho Panza's friendship. Without his faithful squire Sancho Panza, of course, the story wouldn't be the same. It also thus shows that despite the crazy plans that Don Quixote devises, Sancho Panza remains at his side at all times. But the story could possibly trying to tell us that somehow insanity leads an individual towards their reality. He who reads much and walks much goes far and knows much. One of the wisest lessons to learn from Don Quixote. With this quote, Miguel de Cervantes transmits through the main character the importance of reading from the point of view of culture. The character wants to show how cultured people become when they read. This is due to all the information and also cultural wealth found in the books.